Thank you so much, Julie. So as you just mentioned, I am in Israel. Sukkot is starting here in a couple hours. We've already built our sukkah. Dinner is in the oven. So this is a glimpse into everyone's future. It's coming up. I want to I'm going to be asking a lot of questions and inviting you to participate a lot in this session. In general, you guys are muted, so the best way to participate is chat. But if you use the virtual hand raise, then we'll also see, and then Julie will be able to unmute you. For now, I just have a question that I would love to hear from as many of you as possible. If you could just put a few words in chat. And the question is, I want to know, in your mind, what is Sukkot about? And I'll just explain, I'll just elaborate what I mean. Let's say Passover is about the Exodus story, and it's about freedom. Okay, and those are kind of the things that we think of right away when we think of Passover. But what about Sukkot? Give me a thought about what you think this holiday is actually about. Okay, we've got harvest, Jewish Thanksgiving. I like that. All right, anyone else? Understanding that we always have the protection of Hashem, welcoming the stranger, the fall, completion of the holidays, right? Oh my gosh, it's been a lot of holidays, right? Harvest festival celebration. Okay, so there's a lot of different themes going on. Keeping an old tradition, we're definitely going to be talking about that one. A hands-on experience of how flimsy our lives are and how he cares for us. Nice. Remembering the time that the Israelites were in the wilderness. Okay, all right, so I feel like we've got really the whole range of interpretations of Sukkot here. And notice also how different they are from each other. And part of that is because Sukkot it's less obvious what it's about. I think if I asked you what Passover is about, pretty much everybody would give the same answer, but Sukkot is a little bit more ambiguous. And one of the reasons that it's more ambiguous is that it's kind of missing a backstory, right? That Passover, oh yeah, we eat the matzah because the Israelites' bread didn't have time to leaven. And oh yeah, Hanukkah, we light the menorah because the Israelites lit the menorah. But Sukkot, what's the story behind it? It's not quite clear. And the Torah is actually very unhelpful when it comes to this story. In Leviticus, the Torah tells us that there is a backstory to Sukkot, but look what it is. You shall live in booths 7 days. All citizens of Israel shall live in booths in order that future generations might know that I made the Israelite people live in booths when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. Okay. The thing is, did God have us live in booths when we left Egypt? If you look at the story of the Exodus in the Torah, you actually won't find anything about and then all the Israelites took their schach and stuck it on top of their little canvas structure. It's not there. This is a thing that the Torah is telling us we're supposed to remember, but we don't remember it. It doesn't, and in fact, when the rabbis in the Talmud discuss this, what exactly we're remembering on Sukkot, they're actually not sure what it is. There is a discussion in the Talmud about whether the Israelites did sit in a sukkah, the way that we sit in a sukkah, or whether in fact what we're really talking about when we say that the Israelites sat in a sukkah is we're really talking about the clouds of glory. The fact that God protected the Israelites in the desert, as some of you said in the chat, and that's kind of like a sukkah, that in some way the sukkah is sort of a recreation of the thing that God used to protect us, even though the thing that God used to protect us was not made of the things that our sukkah was made of. It was in fact a cloud. So basically, we don't really have a clear story of what Sukkot is about. And what I want to suggest today is that maybe we don't have a story in the past associated with Sukkot, because maybe the big story of Sukkot hasn't happened yet. Because in fact, there are many sources that associate Sukkot with future times. And when I say future times, I mean like the end of the world, like the apocalypse. Like that is what Sukkot is about. So first I want to show you something in the Bible that basically says that. This is from Zechariah. The book of Zechariah is one of the latter prophets, one of those like little minor prophets. And he has this whole vision about what's going to happen at the end of days. And he imagines this like gigantic war in which at the end of the war, kind of God's presence is manifest in the world. Like everyone knows that God is the true God. And right after that happens, here's what happens next. All who survive of all those nations that came up against Jerusalem shall make a pilgrimage year by year to bow low to the King, Lord of hosts, and to observe the Feast of Booths. Okay? That is the thing that happens in the time of the apocalypse, after everyone recognizes that God is God, then there is a big Sukkah party. That is the resolution at the end. And this Sukkah is like a big deal. Any of the earth's communities that do not make the pilgrimage to Jerusalem to bow low to the King, Lord of hosts, shall receive no rain. If the community of Egypt does not make this pilgrimage, it shall not be visited by the same affliction with which the Lord will strike the other nations that do not come up to observe the Feast of Booths. Such shall be the punishment of Egypt and of all the nations that do not come up to observe the Feast of Booths. So everybody's got to observe Sukkot. That is the holiday that all of the nations have to celebrate at the end of days. I'm just going to take down the screen share for a second, just so we can all talk about that for a minute before we go on to our next source. What do you think this is about? By the way, I see some comments here that are interesting, which is Sasha Clark said, I assume everyone in the desert lives in a tent though, right? And like that makes sense. It stands to reason that they had to like put up some kind of shelter, and presumably they would put up some kind of shelter that was like taken from the plants that were around them, which is basically what a sukkah is. So yeah, it is just, it's a reasonable thing to assume. It's just not a story that we know. Okay, so getting back to what we just read, why is it, do you think, that the holiday that everyone needs to celebrate in the end of days is Sukkot? Why not Yom Kippur? What about, the punishment comes next. I skipped it. It's pretty gruesome. I don't remember the exact details, but it's like not pretty. But I'm curious what you think about why all the nations of the world have to observe the holiday of Sukkot, and why that's the holiday that comes up at the end of days. What do you think? What do you think? The great equalizer, says Ilana Goldshine. I'd be curious to hear more about exactly what you mean, Ilana. The knowledge of Hashem will be all over the world, fine, but why specifically Sukkot? Oh, leaving behind the past, says Joey, meaning, I just want to sit on that for 1 second, meaning maybe exactly the fact that Sukkot isn't a holiday that has to do with our past in a concrete way is the holiday that then makes sense for everybody to celebrate, because it's not particularistic. So it can become universal, right? It isn't something that's just about me. It's something that can be about everything. Oh, I like these other explanations also, because everyone should thank God for a harvest, meaning that really Sukkot is also about God's protection, and that at the end of the world, when everyone recognizes God, the thing that everyone needs to do is to recognize God's protection, and and the kind of God's protection is kind of both a reward and an obligation. That now that we have God's protection, we also have to kind of show that we have God's protection and recognize that. And the way that we do that is by observing the holiday of Sukkot. Okay, Ken just pointed out that all of the nations bring sacrifices during Sukkot, as opposed to Shmini Atzeret, which is a holiday specifically for Israel. So that Sukkot actually has kind of this universal dimension, that it's something that's supposed to be for everyone. Our guests are the other nations. So kind of, right. Okay, so more about kind of this theme of God's protection. So that God's protection is something universal, and this kind of lack of a past also makes it kind of accessible to everyone, to the whole world. The nations of the world don't need to celebrate Passover. Like, that's a holiday about like the Jews becoming a nation. It doesn't have anything to do with them, but Sukkot really kind of potentially belongs to everyone. Okay, so all of that was very well and good, but now I want to get to the Talmudic story that I came here to share with you. This is it's kind of a spoiler that I'm telling you now that this Talmudic story is about Sukkot, because it actually only talks about Sukkot right at the end of the story. So bear with me as we go on a Talmudic romp through the apocalyptic imagination of the rabbis. What's gonna happen at the end? Rabbi Chanina bar Papa, this is source number 3. Rabbi Chanina bar Papa taught, and some say Rabbi Simlai. Oh, you know what? I actually just want to mention one thing before I keep reading, which is this story appears in the Babylonian Talmud in Tractate Avodah Zarah, right at the beginning of the tractate, page 2a. Remember, there is no page 1 in the Talmud, so this is really right at the beginning of the tractates. And if you were to open up your Talmud to this page, what you would see is not exactly what I have brought you here, because I kind of pared it down a little bit. I just want you to know that in case you check it against your Talmuds at home, that I took out some of the proof texts. I took out some of the like later glosses that appear in the Talmud that discuss the story, because I wanted to get us like a smooth narrative. Okay, so with that caveat, Rabbi Chanina bar Papa taught, and some say Rabbi Simlai, in the future, the Holy One, blessed be, will bring a Torah scroll and place it in his lap and say, anyone who engaged in its study should come and take a reward. Okay, so here's what happens. The end of days, everybody's waiting, and God says, okay, who learned Torah? Let me ask you, does that sound like a fair way to decide who should get reward in the end of days? Okay, somebody said no. It sounds kind of, not everyone was able to study Torah. It sounds kind of rigged also. Like, right, what about good deeds? Right, also, like, what about, like, it's kind of like we the Jews, like, all of a sudden have this, like, huge leg up on everybody else because nobody else was studying Torah. And so it seems kind of unfair. I think that what this Talmudic story is trying to say is it's kind of trying to present this sort of surprise that, like, guess what? Like, this thing that like we thought was important and nobody else thought was important, in the end of days, it'll turn out that like we were right and like everybody else was wrong. So I think it is supposed to be kind of this this big surprise, but it also has this feeling of like, okay, like I also feel a little bit uncomfortable. It seems a bit unfair. So immediately, here, I'm over here. Immediately, the nations of the world gather and come intermingled, right? Everybody comes running to go get their reward. And the Holy One, blessed be, says to them, do not enter before me intermingled. Rather, let each and every nation enter with their scholars. Okay, everybody line up. I'm going to take you one at a time. Okay, next paragraph. Immediately, the Roman Empire enters first before him. The Holy One, blessed be, says to them, with what did you occupy yourselves? Okay, like, tell us, what did you do? They say before him, Master of the universe, we have established many marketplaces. We have built many bathhouses, and we have increased much silver and gold. And we did all of this only for the Jewish people so that they would be free to engage in Torah study. Okay, so how do you like the Romans' argument for why they should get the reward? All right, Joey is laughing at this. Okay, Okay, sounds like, looking at the chat, liar, liar, pants on fire. You are not convinced that that is in fact why the Romans did all the stuff that they did. Now, I want to point out that the stuff that the Romans are saying that they did are actually pretty impressive stuff, right? They created, this civilization that was really impressive. Their technology was better than anything that came before them. They actually have many accomplishments that they could be proud of, and kind of the problem here is the standard. They're trying to take their accomplishments, which are in a totally different realm, and apply them to this other thing, which is Torah, and it doesn't work very well. And just as you were not particularly convinced by the Romans' argument, God is nobody's fool either. The Holy One, blessed be, says to them, fools of the world, everything that you did for your own needs. You established marketplaces to place prostitutes in them, bathhouses for your own enjoyment. And as for silver and gold, it is mine. As it is stated, mine is the silver and mine is the gold, said the Lord of hosts. Okay, so if we didn't like the Romans' claim of why they should be receiving reward, what do we think about God's rejection of the claim? By the way, I just want to point out what Ken wrote over here, which is he points out that also the Romans, right, aside from the fact that the Romans didn't do these things so that the Jews could study Torah, in fact, the Romans persecuted the Jews in addition to everything that they did. Right now, the nations don't seem to be being evaluated vis-a-vis the Jews, right? They seem to be being evaluated on their own without us talking about whether the Romans were out to get us or not, but it does come up a little later. Okay, so definitely this is something that we will talk about as we go on, the fact that the Romans are taking credit for their accomplishments instead of thanking Hashem, and that's kind of what God is saying when God says gold and silver is mine. God doesn't mean that gold and silver is God's, it's in God's wallet. God means that really it's in God's control, whether you are wealthy or not. And the Romans are trying to take credit for amassing gold and silver when really God was the one who granted them this. Now, the thing that doesn't sit quite so well with me is that much as I don't like the Romans' claim that oh yeah, we did this for the Jews so they could study Torah, I also don't love God's claim that the Romans did these things for these really negative reasons, right? They established marketplaces to place prostitutes in them. Okay, so there might be prostitutes in the marketplaces, but there are a lot of positive things about commerce. This line kind of feels when somebody says oh, the internet, it was invented so that people could watch pornography. Okay, yes, that's one of the things that happens on the internet, but the internet is so much more complex than that, and there are positive things and there are other things, and and so that God's answer also seems really reductionist in a way that's sort of beyond that. Really the Romans come off as they should be coming off, aside from the persecution, which we're putting aside for now. The Romans should be coming off here as neutral, right? They didn't do the Torah study, but they also they did all these things that are legitimate things, and God doesn't even recognize the accomplishments of the Romans in any way. That even these things that could be neutral / mildly positive are seen as negative. Immediately, they leave disappointed. No eternal reward for you, Romans. Okay, who's next? The Roman Empire leaves, and the Persian Empire enters after it. The Holy One, blessed be, says to them, with what did you occupy yourselves? They say before him, Master of the universe, we have built many bridges, we have conquered many cities, and we have fought many wars. And we did all this only for the Jewish people so that they would engage in Torah study. Okay, we're not even going to talk about what we think about that because we have already discussed it. The gloss that I left out actually says, why did the Persians think that that would work when the Romans, they had already seen that the Romans miserably failed at it? And it's a fair question to ask. The answer that the Talmud gives, actually, interestingly enough, is the fact that the Persians thought to themselves, well, at least we didn't persecute the Jews the way that the Romans did. And so maybe God will look at our actions more favorably. But God does not look at their actions more favorably. The Holy One, blessed be, says to them, everything that you did for your own needs. You established bridges to collect tolls from them. You conquered cities to use their forced labor. And with regard to wars, I wage wars. As it is stated, the Lord is a man of war. Again, this idea of, it's the same, notice it's the same pattern as last time, where there are three things that the Romans said that they did and that the Persians said that they did. And the first two, God turns the positive into the negative. And the third one, God says, well, that was really me, right? Oh, you thought that you were so victorious in war. I'm the one who decides whether people win wars or not, so that credit actually goes to me. And immediately they leave from before him disappointed. So the Persians also do not succeed in earning eternal reward in this particular venue. And likewise with each and every nation. So basically, what we're picturing is that one by one, the nations of the world are lining up. They're presenting their accomplishments before God, and God is saying, nope, that's not what I wanted. Now the nations start to get a little frustrated about the unfairness of all of this, and they point out, the nations say before God, Master of the universe, did you give us the Torah and we did not accept it? Meaning, like, this isn't fair. You're holding us to the standard of, did you follow the Torah, but you never gave us the Torah. Immediately, the Holy One, blessed be, says to them, the first mitzvot will let you hear the truth. The 7 Noahide mitzvot that you accepted, where did you fulfill them? Right? So meaning the rabbis have a tradition that all of the nations of the world have an obligation to observe 7 mitzvot, 7 commandments. And he's saying to the nations of the world, you're complaining that you didn't get the Torah? You didn't even observe those 7 minimal commandments that you needed to do. So this is really, you had a test and you didn't pass it. But now it gets interesting. Now finally the Jews come into the picture. Rather, this is what the Gentiles say before the Holy One, blessed be. Master of the universe, the Jewish people who accepted the Torah, where is the evidence that they fulfilled its mitzvot? So wait a minute, now like the non-Jews are, the nations are like, well, everyone's doing it. Like nobody's actually keeping all these mitzvot. How do we know that, how do we know that Bnei Israel, that the Jews, how do we know that the Jews did any better than us? The Holy One, blessed be, says to the nation, let the witnesses come from among you and testify that the Jewish people fulfilled the Torah in its entirety. So this is actually a cute part over here where God says, oh, you want proof that the Jewish people observe the mitzvot? You guys are the proof. And now he goes through and gives some examples. Let Nimrod come and testify about Abraham, that he did not engage in idol worship. Does anybody know how Nimrod knew? Oh, by the way, I'm just looking at the comments. I hadn't been looking, and I see that Joey mentioned the idea of the nations rejecting the Torah. In one of the glosses on this story that I did not bring here, that story about the nations rejecting the Torah also comes up. Does anybody know what the Talmud is talking about with Nimrod and Abraham? How does Nimrod know that Abraham didn't engage in idol worship? There's a Talmudic legend about this. There is a midrash, yes, and the midrash says that Nimrod tried to force Abraham to worship idols. Yep, here we go. Nimrod the king. Yep, okay. Right, so Nimrod was the king, and actually there's going to be a bunch of stories here, so if anybody wants to peek ahead and write in chat what these stories are about that are coming up, then go for it. I'm going to go through them one by one. The first one, Nimrod. according to the Midrash, tried to force Abraham to worship idols and threw him into a burning furnace when he didn't, and God made a miracle and saved Abraham from Nimrod. Next one, let Lavan come and testify about Jacob that he is not suspect with regard to robbery. Okay, how does Lavan know that Jacob wasn't a thief? Lavan basically knows that Jacob wasn't a thief because Lavan was the one who was stealing and cheating from Jacob, right? There was the whole deal where Jacob was working for Lavan for so many years, and they made an agreement that all of the striped sheep or all of the colorful sheep would go to Jacob and all the other ones would go to Lavan, and Lavan kept changing the rules and kept switching things around. So Lavan, since he was robbing Jacob, knows that Jacob wasn't. Yeah. Okay, let the wife of Potiphar come and testify about Joseph, that he is not suspect of sin. Okay, how does the wife of Potiphar know that Joseph is not suspect of sin? Potiphar's wife tried to seduce Joseph. She knows that he was not suspect of sin because she was the one who tried to get him to commit sin, and he didn't. And let Nebuchadnezzar come and testify about Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, that they did not prostrate themselves before an image. This one is from the book of Daniel, where the reason that Nebuchadnezzar knows, like the other ones, you can already guess at this point, even if you don't know the story in Daniel, like the other ones, the reason that Nebuchadnezzar knows that, yes, good point, Sasha. Right. So Nebuchadnezzar knows that Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah didn't bow to an image because he's the one who threw them into the fire when they didn't prostrate themselves before an image and saw them being miraculously saved, as Wendy says. Let Darius come and testify about Daniel, that he did not neglect his prayer. Also a story, that's the story about where Daniel gets thrown in the lion's den because he is praying to God. So Darius, who threw him in the lion's den, definitely knows that Daniel did not neglect his prayer. So what's the theme here? How do the nations know that the Jews didn't neglect the Torah? They've seen with their own eyes, but it's not even just with their own eyes. I think it's even more than that. Right, because basically what we're talking, they are all guilty of what they are accusing the Jews of. They tried to stop them. Right here is where the oppression comes up. And notice it really is not being leveled as like a direct accusation against the nations. Right, there isn't any point in this story where God says to the nations, you guys are bad because you persecuted the Jews. But here's how the persecution of the Jews is coming up, that basically God is saying to the nations, through your persecution of the Jews, you have seen how dedicated the Jews are to observing my commandments. You are the ones who put the Jews to the test, and you saw it with your own eyes. And then just the final one is kind of also a bit of a midrash here, is let all these people with the funny names, Bildad the Shuhite, Sophar the Naamanite, and Eliphaz the Temanite, and Elihu son of Barachel the Buzite come and testify about the Jewish people, that they fulfill the Torah in its entirety. This is 3 characters from the book of Eov, the book of Job, who, like, according to the simple meaning of the text, don't have anything to do with the Jews at all, but I guess according to the Midrash, they do. So fine. So basically what has happened at this point is that God has kind of stuck it to the nations in a lot of ways. The nations keep trying to win, and they just keep failing. They tried to make an argument about their own righteousness, didn't work. They tried to make an argument about the Jews' lack of righteousness, and it came back to bite them in their faces, that it ended up kind of reflecting poorly on them again. But now we finally get to the part about the Sukkah. The Gentiles say before him, Master of the universe, give us the Torah afresh and we'll perform it. All right, come on, give us a chance now, right? Give us the Torah now, we're gonna do it. The Holy One, blessed be, says to them, fools of the world, one who takes pains on Shabbat will eat on Shabbat Eve, will eat on Shabbat. But one who does not take pains on Shabbat Eve, from where will he eat on Shabbat, right? If you don't get your food ready before Shabbat, then what are you gonna eat on Shabbat, says God. Meaning, like, it's too late. Now is not the part where you do your cooking. Now is the part where you eat the meal that you cooked for yourselves before, or in this case, where you kind of reap the reward or the punishment of the actions that you have already done. But even so, I have an easy mitzvah, and its name is Sukkah. Go and perform it. So here we go. At the end of the world, when all the nations are raring to go, come on, give us a mitzvah and we're going to do it, God says, okay, Sukkot. I want to just point out, by the way, that the author of this Talmudic story clearly is thinking about Zechariah when he says this, right? We read that biblical quote from Zechariah that talks about the nations of the world coming and observing Sukkot at the end of days. And I think that this whole thing is kind of a midrash on that, where he's saying, like, oh yeah, like that's going to be the mitzvah at the end of the world based on those sources. But let's see where he takes this. So great, it's a really easy mitzvah. Immediately, each and every one takes materials and goes and constructs a sukkah on top of his roof. So everybody's like, sure, all right, easy peasy, no problem. We can build a sukkah. Everybody builds a sukkah. And the Holy One, blessed be, sets upon them the heat of the sun in the summer season, right? It gets really hot. All right, so I saw when you guys wrote where you are located that you guys are all over the world. Some of you are some of you, the weather is warm, some of you, the weather is cold. I actually grew up in Toronto, and there I have memories of sitting in a sukkah wearing mittens. But now this midrash was clearly written by someone who lived in a warm climate, and this is what we're experiencing right now in Sukkot in Israel. We've set up 2 fans in our sukkah, and if we could put an air conditioning unit in our sukkah, it would be even better. It is going to be hot. And that's what they're imagining here, is that's what bad weather on Sukkot is. Bad weather on Sukkot is when it gets really hot. So the Holy One, blessed be, sets upon them the heat of the sun in the summer season, and each and every one kicks his sukkah and leaves, right? That was short-lived, right? They were all like, oh yeah, we're gonna do this, we're gonna build the sukkah, and a minute later it gets too hot and they're like, forget this, knock down the sukkah and leave. If you think that is a sort of a humorous picture, you're in good company. Immediately, the Holy One, blessed be, sits and laughs. Rabbi Yitzchak says there is no laughter for the Holy One, blessed be, except on that day alone. And that is the end of the story, right? The way that this story ends is with everybody trying to observe the mitzvah of Sukkot and failing. Okay, so I think that one of the reasons that the sage who told this story was probably that it was like pretty hot out that year on Sukkot. And he wanted to like encourage everybody that like, yeah, it's hard, but like, it's really important for us to like go through it and like live in the sukkah, even if it's hot, and we can do this. But why is it so hard for the nations? Like, why can't they just like stick it out and sit in the sukkah even when it's hot? What do you think? Yep. Okay. Sasha, by the way, just quoted the verse that is actually, I told you I left out the proof text, and that is the proof text that, that the Talmud quotes. So what do you think, why do you think, sort of in terms of, oh, Hannah says that it's 10 degrees in Poland today, by the way. They aren't accustomed to suffering for their faith, possibly. they still don't have real belief that, right, that we remember we were talking about the Sukkah, how the Sukkah kind of represents God's protection. So that kind of sitting in the Sukkah is this kind of accepting God's protection, that they're not really ready to do that, something like that. They don't truly understand. Oh, they're missing the Torah study, says Leslie. That's really interesting, that if they had studied the Torah, which was sort of the whole point of the beginning, then like maybe they would be more ready for this. One of the things that's interesting about this is that, right, their religion and culture are different. Yep. Also, God is making it difficult. There's also kind of, again, the sense, right? We started this story by saying, like, isn't this a bit rigged? And like, again, it feels a bit rigged. Although in the Talmudic gloss on this story, they discuss that question and they say, yeah, but sometimes it's hot in the Sukkah. Like, yeah, sometimes we got to live with that. But one of the things that I think is interesting to note is how the story started kind of naming the accomplishments of the nations, all the things that they built and all the things that they invented and all the things that they created. And the Sukkah kind of comes as a contrast to that, right? That the Sukkah is kind of the opposite of all of those things. The Sukkah is where you basically sit and do nothing. And that the nations are presented here as being really good at creating and at accomplishing and at building. And even the part with the building the Sukkah, they do that really well, right? They're great. They're like, oh, I need to build a Sukkah. Sure, no problem. Here's a Sukkah. But the part that is actually the main idea of Sukkot is not to build a Sukkah, it's to sit in a Sukkah. And that part, the sitting, the just like doing nothing, the making ourselves vulnerable and dependent is the part that's kind of what our strength is. That their strength, the nation's strength might be the building and the inventing and the creating, but our strength is the ability to do nothing, to be vulnerable. I feel like I actually understood this story better after the last year, after kind of going through lockdowns having to do with the pandemic, where like I feel like our like political leaders would always be getting up here in Israel at least and saying like, come on guys, how difficult is it to sit on your couch and watch Netflix for a month or two? And the answer is very difficult. And that's kind of what the at least in this Talmudic story, that's the challenge of Sukkot, the challenge of stopping, of not creating and building an accomplishing, but of just not doing those things, of making ourselves vulnerable. And we have to, and the Sukkah kind of offers protection, but that in order for us to accept that protection of God, we have to expose ourselves. We have to make ourselves vulnerable, and that's the thing that is difficult. That's the kind of challenge. And so that's sort of the strength of the Jewish people, according to this story, is our ability to stop, is our ability to make ourselves weak and to really depend on God. So the other thing I think that is interesting about this story is that it kind of highlights this idea of sort of this, the Sukkah kind of is this, the Sukkah is a temporary structure, but we can see that in this story, the Sukkah is both temporary and also something that connects us to eternity. So there are kind of all of these contradictions, the temporary and the eternal, the protection and the vulnerability. And what we need to do is to, so Laura says, do we feel vulnerable if we believe God is protecting us? And I think that that's exactly the question, is that we need to make ourselves vulnerable, but we won't, hopefully we won't actually feel vulnerable, even when we're sitting in that Sukkah that is, you know, wind can knock it down, rain can come into it, but hopefully we will be able to feel protected. And that's, I think, the challenge of the Sukkah, according to this story. Oh, interesting. This is actually a really nice comment. I just want to highlight that Lisa said that it also connects to the Shemitah year, that's also about stopping and depending on God. And there is actually like a really nice dovetail there, that like this is every 7 years is the Jewish Shemitah, which just started a couple weeks ago, and it's a year when traditionally the land is not you don't do all the things, you don't farm the land, and it's also about kind of stopping and depending on God. So it is kind of a theme that connects there also. Okay, so that's all I have to say, and I'm happy to hear other thoughts and questions from any of you. Yep, Sukkot of Shemitah. Yep. Right, Sukkot, meaning Sukkot on Shemitah, actually takes on sort of an additional significance of the tradition of Hakel, of everyone gathering together to read the Torah at the temple. So the rabbis, I mean, the Torah already recognizes that there is this connection between Sukkot and Shemitah. Okay, right, all right. So right, the Sukkot, the connection between Sukkot as a tabernacle. Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's the Sukkot, sitting in a sukkah is sort of this kind of holy space, because it's a space where just being in it is already a mitzvah. So it kind of also sort of reminds us of other holy spaces. Great. All right. Well, thank you so much. I enjoyed learning with all of you today, and I want to wish you a great, beautiful and Sukkot, and I hope that you have great weather in the Sukkah, and that you don't have to kick any sukkahs, and that you're comfortable and enjoy yourselves.